Welcome back to the channel. We're playing 20 questions with,
Frank with Stationery at 4, which is my YouTube channel.
and let's get into the questions. When I say fountain pen, what pen do you think of?
Right now, because it's the next pen in my grail list, I'm thinking of the Pilot Custom 823, the amber especially.
All right. How did you get into pens?
Well, it's a bit of a story. I was raised all over the world. So I was born in India, but left India. And when I left India, I was raised in British schools. And this was when fountain pens were still a thing in classrooms. And grade 1 and grade 2, you were only given a pencil to write with. Grade 3, there was a bit of a ceremony. And when they deemed your handwriting legible enough, you got to gravitate away from a pencil and into a fountain pen. And I didn't really understand the whole ceremony of it, but I remember the class where my teacher handed me this blue Schaefer fountain pen, and I was in awe, especially uncapping it and seeing the nib for the first time. It just blew my mind. And we spent 2 classes literally taking apart the pen, putting it back together, how to fill up the ink in it, and it blew my mind. I fell in love, and I think there's just such a aspect of committing to one's writing with a pen, but especially with a fountain pen, that you had to strike out and show your mistakes and things like that really registered. So growing up in British schools, when I finally came to Canada, I searched around for a fountain pen and I couldn't find one. It was all these cheap plastic Bic pens that they kept handing me, and it frustrated me, and I didn't really like it. I was searching for fountain pens. I never really saw one. And I kept getting into finer rollerball pens and ballpoint pens, trying to mimic that same feel, but it just wasn't the same. And my wife, for my 30th birthday, gifted me a fountain pen, and I was blown away. And I asked her, "Where did you get this?" And she said, "Oh, from a stationery shop here in Calgary." And it turns out they had fountain pens. I just literally, the irony was the stationery shop was literally across the street from where I went to high school, and I just never popped in. I don't know why. So yeah, long story short, that's how I got back into fountain pens. It was reinvigorated that love of it, and then watching amazing YouTubers like Brian Goulet and his whole pen cast, the original Goulet pen thing that he had going on. I didn't realize there was other people out there like me who are interested in fountain pens.
You've answered question number 3, that your first
Okay.
pen was a Schaefer. So, question number 4, what's your current daily driver?
Ooh, I've got, that's a tough question to lobby at someone who loves fountain pens. I've got a few. I love my Kaweco brass sport. This sits on my traveler's notebook at all times. The other one that I really like is my Pilot Vanishing Point. Both of these are just quick pocket pens, I would classify as, and I use them quite a bit in my traveler's notebook, which I keep on me at all times. But I have 4 other ones going. I've got an Edison Beaumont, I've got an Estabrook Esty, I've got the Benu Talisman, and a Navalor Nautilus in black.
Okay.
And I rotate throughout those on a daily basis. So I would say all of them are my daily drivers. Plus a whole pencil case of fountain pens that are always inked up, ready to go, just in case none of those other ones work out for whatever reason.
What's the trim on the Nautilus? Is it the original trim, or is it one of the new colors?
It's the black. It's the Coriodoros, I think it is. So
Okay.
I wanted a nice black one, and it was the bronze Coriodoros, which had this really beautiful sea-like, ocean-like trim to it, which really just spoke to me. It was one of the first ones that they released. But speaking of the Nautilus, and I'm just going to go into a bit of a segue here, I didn't like the nib that came with the Nautilus pen. It railroaded. No, sorry, not railroaded. I got corrected by a commenter on this. It hard started, hard stopped. So it had a lot of problems just getting going. I talked to Nautilus at the time, sent in the nib. They sent me a few replacements, but it never quite worked the way I'd expected it to. I ended up just Frankensteining it and shoving another nib on into that pen, and now it works perfectly.
Sometimes you need to do some DIY.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your favorite ink?
Also, a very tough question to lobby at someone who loves fountain
Hemingway
pens.
Jones did 3. It's no longer a one ink question, apparently.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to try and narrow this down. Iroshizuku line, the Pilot line,
Yep.
is a favorite of mine. I find them quite reliable for my writing. The Konpeki, which is a really nice blue, I really like that. The Tsukiyo, which is a darker blue, I really like that. One of the ones that I've recently gotten into, which has surprised me because it's just a black, it's the Pilot Carbon Black. I really like that. Just it's a nice rich black and it's very water resistant. Ooh, I would say any type of blue fountain pen ink. Maybe I'm just going to leave it there because there are so many that I could easily get into.
What's your favorite brand of either pens or ink?
That's an interesting question. I find myself gravitating towards Pilot fountain pens right now, just because I am really enjoying their 14 karat gold nibs. I find them buttery smooth, and that's what I can afford in my budget right now. I definitely, as I mentioned in the previous question, really like their inks. I think they're
Yep.
very reliable. However, I would say if I were to pick one brand for inks, I couldn't do it. I would say that I love exploring, and if you watch my YouTube channel, I keep talking about how literally every month or every couple of weeks I swap out all the inks in all my fountain pens. So I'm always exploring and trying out new things.
Yeah, I feel like I'm constantly trying out inks, either in ink swaps or trying out a new bottle from a different
Totally.
brand.
Yeah.
Vintage or modern?
I guess this one's a bit of an easy one because I don't have a vintage pen, even though I really
Okay.
do want one in my collection. I would say modern just because that's what I have. However, if I could find that vintage Schaefer that I started out with in grade 3, I would love it. I started looking just recently and I've been struggling to find the exact model. I've got variations that are pretty close,
Mm-hmm.
but that cheap $8 pen I haven't been able to find. So if I find that, I'd definitely pick that up as my solid vintage pen.
I recommend Facebook Marketplace.
Ah, yes. Good place to look.
That's so many vintage pens there, at least here. Do you swatch all your inks?
I do. I do. Yeah. It's I wasn't sure I was going to, but and I think you would appreciate this if you're frequently swapping out your inks, you lose reference of what characteristics certain inks have, and I'd found that for me swatching the inks was really really important just to compare. I don't really have a good system in place. I've just taken a couple of old notebooks and have done kind of a big spread with ink splats and different writing styles in there. But to be able to compare a certain blue next to a certain blue, because it's all in the same notebook, I can't rip out the pages. Well, I
Yeah.
could, but then I'd be taking apart my notebook. So yes, I do swatch
Yeah.
all my inks.
It's why I like the cola ring dippers, because you just dip
I
them in
was
an
gonna
ink
ask
bottle.
what those were. Yeah,
Yeah. They're the cola ring dippers, and you just dip them in an ink bottle, and then you've got
you
your color swatches.
you actually dip them in the ink bottle. No
I'll
way.
send you the video I have on them. They're great.
Deal.
Do you have any pens where you daily drive the same pen and ink combination?
Similar to the previous question, I would say the Coeco Brass Sport. I've always got the Platinum Black in it right now. In fact, that is probably the only consistent ink pen combination that I've kept for more than 4 weeks.
Right. Uh, do you have your writing samples of nibs in a way that you can look through them so you know what the nib of a pen looks like, or do you just sort of know how every pen writes and what the nib is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say no, I don't have a writing sample, although I started a notebook with that intent in mind. And what I found for myself is I don't necessarily gravitate towards one nib size. I seem to have a spectrum of fines, extra fines, mediums, and broads. I don't go beyond that typically.
Yeah.
Although I do have a few italics, which hasn't quite worked out for me in my writing style. I would say I have an intuitive feel for what works for me. Any long form journaling, I always tend to lean towards a Western medium in
Okay.
terms of the nib size, and then anything to do with the traveler's notebook or quick notes are the fine. And if I'm sketching, I prefer the extra fine.
What's a pen you wish you could see in person?
Hmm. I would love to see a Mont Blanc 149 in person. Haven't seen that in person yet.
What so you've answered that you want a Pilot 870 custom
Custom
873?
823. Yeah,
823.
823.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have any other Grail pens, or is that the only one currently?
You know, in full transparency, I was pretty disappointed with my last Grail pen, and it wasn't necessarily the pen's fault. It was the Lamy 2000.
Okay.
Everybody has a lot of hype around this pen, and I figured I needed one, and I ended up picking one up. It has a certain sweet spot. It's a beautiful pen. It writes really well. Just didn't work for how I tend to write, which my handwriting is pretty relaxed, so I've got a very shallow angle of writing, and that pen just doesn't work for more than 2 minutes in terms of my writing style. So I'm a little bit wary of the list of Grail pens right now. So as I mentioned, the next one in my mind is the Pilot Custom A23. I'm debating the Sailor King of Pens, just
Okay.
a King of Pens. I would love one of those because I hear they're amazing. Now I'm starting to list off pens because it's just coming to mind. The Platinum 3776, I've always wanted one of those. I think those are really beautiful pens. I would love a Pelican M600. I think it's the M600. And I'm going to totally butcher the artist name that the pen is inspired by. It's Glauco Chambon.
Okay.
Totally butcher that name. However, a coworker of mine, he lent me his fresh in the box sealed pen to unbox on my channel. I didn't realize what I was signing myself up for. I knew Pelicans generally are expensive pens.
Yep.
I had no idea how expensive this particular one was. And I asked him, "Are you sure you want me to unbox this on my channel?" He said, "Yeah, no problem. You know, it's your thing. Go for it." Turns out it was a $1,200 pen. Gorgeous, gorgeous pen. As soon as I unboxed it, I fell in love, and I was trying to figure out ways to somehow keep the pen and not hand it back to my coworker, just because I don't even know how to describe it. The amazing lacquer, the attention to detail, the colors that pop out, the fact that it's a Pelican and it writes really well. That's another Grail pen. Pelican M600 would be, or an M800. I would love to have that pen. Yeah.
That was me at the Chicago Pen Show night one, because
Yeah.
they do a pizza party. Which is really people sitting at tables unrolling pen rolls and just handing you pens and letting you try
Yeah.
out things from their collection. And so on the same night, I tried out, I think, 3 different Mont Blanc pens and 2 pens from Tasha. And I went,
Yes.
oh, these are so far out of my price range. And oh, I really want them.
Well, here, I mean, Tasha is another girl pen. Of course, I've got girl pens. Now
Yeah.
that I'm speaking out loud about it, the list is quite extensive. I would love any sort of Urushi pens. Just, I love the attention to detail on those pens there. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to stop there because I could keep going.
What pen would you recommend to a beginner?
You know, I think it really depends on your budget and what you're willing to spend on a pen. There's a lot of, at least certainly with people I've chatted with, and when they're getting introduced to fountain pens, some people are very enthusiastic. They just want the best quality pen they can afford within their budget, and other people are pretty apprehensive or suspicious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for those folks, I tend to recommend just a cheap Pilot Metropolitan or Pilot Kakuno, which is effectively the same nib. Uh, any of the varsity pens I think are really, really cheap and functional. The Platinum, I can't remember what their entry line is, but those are really good pens just to get a feel for what a nib looks like that's different from your standard roller ball or ballpoint, and how it writes. And if you get a feel for that, then I would say gravitate from there. In terms of if you've got a little bit more money to spend, any TWSBI Ecos I find are just, you get so much bang for buck in those pens, and I think they certainly have some high end characteristics that whet the appetite for wanting to get into fountain pens a little bit more.
What ink would you recommend to a beginner?
Good old reliable Hiroshizuku Konpeki.
All right. What advice do you have for somebody wanting to try out fountain pens who might be intimidated by them?
Just give it a try. I think I'm a big fan of, just like most things in my life, just if I feel like something is outside of my comfort zone, but I've got a slight interest or a suspicion that I might be interested in it, I will just go ahead and give it a try. I think the advice specifically there is use what's in your budget and accommodate for that. Don't go out and buy a $500 pen and assume that you're going to fall in love with it, because as we've just talked about in terms of Grail pens, there's a lot of hype around certain pens. And what I find about pens, it's such a subjective instrument. It really is how it caters to your writing style, how you want to write with it, what you want to write with the pen with, and what you want to do in terms of growing the hobby or really focusing in on just being a collector, right? So there's different elements to all of these things. So my advice would be, if you're interested in fountain pens but a little bit scared or intimidated by it, there's lots of great resources out there. But just walk into a stationery store if there's one close by you, and just play around with one, a cheap pen. Start there and see if it resonates with you.
Okay. What filling mechanism do you think is most interesting, regardless of if you like to use it or not?
The vacuum filling mechanisms, I have a love-hate relationship with them, depending on the pen. I think they're fantastic, but they're a little bit more finicky to clean out. And the irony, I'm going to say this, I know there's a few folks out there like me. I love fountain pens. I love messing around with inks. What I don't like is cleaning out fountain pens. And perhaps it's a little bit OCD of me. If I'm going to clean out a fountain pen, I want to be able to take it completely apart and not have to spend too much effort in putting it back together. And I find vacuum filling systems, depending on the pen, of course, are just a little bit more effort in terms of getting a little bit more grease, making sure everything fits together, and finding every little nook and cranny where ink might have collected within the body or in the nib housing or against the back end of the vacuum filler there. Generally, though, I really like vacuum fillers. I think they're quite functional for what they are.
Batch clean my pens. I wait until there's like a bunch to do. I refuse. I refuse to do it if there's one pen. It will sit on the counter for weeks. There's got to be more than one if I'm going through the effort of cleaning pens. Like, there's got to be many pens to clean.
I'll perhaps say something a little bit controversial. If there's just one pen or two pens that I'm wanting to swap out inks in, I usually pick an ink color that's pretty close to what I already have in there. Just flush it out. I don't even flush it out. I just kind of just flick the pen out into the sink to try and get as much of the ink out, and then put in the new ink. And there'll be a slight color variation for the first page or two, maybe, and then you get settled into the new ink color.
I don't think that's as controversial as the fact that Hemingway Jones doesn't even flush them out. He just refills his converter with something different when he gets bored of the color. There's an entire thing on Are We Cleaning Fountain Pens Too Often? And that changed how I clean my pens.
There you go. There you go.
I went, oh yeah, I can get behind not cleaning my pens unless I actually have to. Like, unless there's an actual issue, why am I cleaning my pen?
Totally. Yeah. I used to have such a paranoia about it. You have to clean out your pen, and a lot of the instructions that come with these fountain pens, you must clean it out, flush, and all these things. Now I've become really relaxed about it. It's just I'll fill it up with another ink and just keep going.
I might like fill a pill bottle with water, like rinse the like run water through the nib a couple times, and then go, I'm done. And that's only if I'm doing like a huge change. If I'm going from a red to a green, other than that, or like completely changing brands and I don't know how they react to each other.
Totally.
Other than that, I'm like, you'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like if I'm switching from a blue to a yellow, then yes, I'll go through the effort of actually doing a proper flush and cleaning it out, because I don't want to write with green for a few pages.
Yeah. What nib size do you prefer to write with?
I think I answered this in a previous question. I started out in extra fine because I thought that was where the beauty of fountain pens were for some reason. And I quickly shifted into fine and realized once I got into playing with fountain pen inks and wanting to see some shading characteristics or sheen come through, then the extra fines and fines didn't necessarily give me that variation that I was looking for. So then I started gravitating into mediums, and I found medium nibs really good for long form journaling when I want to write 5, 6, 10 pages. And I would classify short form journaling being literally a couple of sentences or maybe a page of notes. And so medium nibs are really good for that. And then I wanted to really mess around with fountain pen inks and get into shimmer inks, and I didn't want to go through the trauma of jeopardizing any of my extra fines, or medium nibs. So I started collecting broad nibs for shimmer inks, which they work fine in my experience. So I typically keep the broad nib just for shimmers, or the recently released Sailor dip nib with the Fude nib.
Okay.
Dip pen, I really use that for shimmer inks as well. So I don't have one particular nib size, and I'm a strong believer of just play around and see what works for you and go all over the place.
Yeah. Is there a style of nib you love but would never actually use?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to try out a platinum music nib, and I thought it was a really interesting nib. It was really, really cool. It had a lot of characteristic to it, but it's not something I could ever see myself actually writing with for more than a sentence, if that. Uh, it looked like a really cool nib. Yeah, I'd love it in a collection. If I had unlimited money to just grow my collection, I would definitely collect a few music nibs, some really funky italic nibs, some custom ground nibs out there for sure. But general daily driving, I tend to be pretty safe with my fines or mediums, really.
Music nibs come up a shocking amount in this series.
Do they?
I share.
Why do you think that is? Go ahead.
Think,
Yeah.
I think I think much like stacked nibs, like we're all interested in them, but then we all, like, most of us try them and we go, these just aren't for us. But there are people, like, I have a friend that at Chicago got a custom ground music nib on her Pilot.
No way. Huh.
Or got her music nib tuned. I honestly can't remember, but it's the first music nib I've ever used. And
Yeah.
I liked it, but I liked it probably because it was one of the most perfect nibs I will ever use.
Right.
Would I like an off-the-shelf music nib? No. I liked the music nib that Annabelle Hiller had just finished with.
Right.
But I would never probably enjoy an off-the-shelf music nib. And that seems to be the general consensus, is that, like, we are all intrigued by music nibs, but very few of us would actually use them.
Yeah. The other one that intrigues me is the Architect nib. I'm always curious about them, but I've never. Nib. Do you have an Architect nib? Does it work for you? Yeah.
An Architect inked up right now.
Oh, nice.
I have a cheapo Architect on a Jinhao 82 from Fountain Pen Revolution, is where the nib's from. I think it's a size 5 or 5.5 nib, and it just, like, goes in any pen that takes a 5. It's great.
Nice.
Because then if you, like, don't like the nib, you've only spent, I think it's like $25.
Right. Yeah. There you go. And do you find the Architect nib it's good for your writing as well?
I tend to use it more when I'm, like, doing titles.
Yeah.
At the top of the page. I don't use it when I'm writing. But I use it when I'm doing titles or I'm making lists. And I like it enough that I'm getting a Kaweco Sport nib ground into an Architect, because what I daily drive almost always in my purse is a Sport.
Yeah.
I want the ability to put an Architect nib on a Sport.
Where do you get your nibs ground? Just out of curiosity.
In person at events.
Okay.
By Matthew Chen.
Yeah. Nice.
So I might. I don't know when this episode's coming out, honestly. Depending on Chicago schedule, I'm going to put myself both on Matthew Chen and Kirk Spears' list, and, like, whichever one texts me at a time that I actually have time at the event is who's going to do my nib work. Or I
Nice.
might just get one done by each of them. The plan is I'm going to get 2 nibs done.
Yeah.
And so one, it could be that one does each, or whoever works with my schedule, because they're doing it. There were appointments, but they're also doing a first come, first serve basis. And so I'm just hoping to get myself on a list.
Nice.
Yeah. But no, I get mine done in person events. I just
Got
like,
it.
you can send stuff in, but like, I'd rather be able to like test stuff in person as they're working on it.
Plus, the person can actually see you write with the
Yeah.
nib and course correct in real time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's just easier. So,
Hmm. I'm gonna have to check that out.
do you always use the same paper? If so, what paper?
No, just like with my fountain pens and my inks, I like to explore. If I were to constrain it, I use the lightweight paper the most from
Okay.
Traveler's Notebook, which is a Tomoe paper. And I suppose I've got Tomoe paper in my long form A5 journal. But I really like Midori paper as well. I quite enjoy the characteristics that it brings out in my ink, and it has a little bit more texture to it, which I really appreciate. Love the Rhodia paper, love Clairefontaine. So I guess, no, I don't have one specific paper that I gravitate towards.
Right. Do you have a least favorite ink or ink color family?
I'm going to say black, just because the irony is I just raved about how much I love the platinum carbon black. I Blacks to me are boring. There's only so much variability in there, and so my first fountain pen, my wife also gave me a beautiful Iroshizuku black ink. I can't remember
Yeah.
the Japanese name for it, but it was really nice. It was a rich black, but I wanted to play with color, and so I just gravitated away from black very quickly. And the fact that I've got it in my Coeco Brassport as a daily driver is only because it's also water resistant, and it's nice for my quick notes. It's just clean. So yeah, I would say black inks I'm not a fan of. I tried picking up a couple of black inks to see if I could get some characteristics in there.
There's
It's a
nothing.
black. It's a black.
No. Again, I agree. The only thing black's good for is being waterproof. The only black I own is waterproof.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
All right. Thanks for playing 20 questions.
Thank you, Alexandra. This was fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.